I grew up on a tobacco farm in Granville County, up in Oxford. My father bought his first farm in 1939, paid $5,000 for it. He bought it with tobacco money. I went to school to Duke, University of Oxford, with tobacco money. Everything I ever wore on my back and on my feet was bought with tobacco money.
Tobacco is something that North Carolina did very well. We grew the greatest tobacco in the world right here in North Carolina. I think Johnston County was about the second most poundage grown here than any place in the world. Tobacco was always the money crop for farmers, and they depended on tobacco for buying shoes and clothing for the children going back to school. Tobacco built many schools, tobacco built hospitals, tobacco is responsible for building many, many homes, and it just afforded the farmers a good way to make a living.
Everybody in Johnston County who's been here for any length of time being at least a couple of 3 generations, can identify with tobacco firsthand because they either grew up on a tobacco farm, or they worked on a tobacco farm, or they worked in a tobacco warehouse. Everybody was involved. This is even today, and certainly was back then even more so, a tobacco county, a tobacco culture, a tobacco society. One of the best friends I ever had in my life, until his death on February 1st, 1987, was the voice of Lucky Strike. His name was Lee Aubrey Riggs. And George Washington Hill, who was president of the American Tobacco Company and noted as a genius in advertising, got wind of him and went down to Durham from New York City and listened to him on the warehouse floor. After he came down in October and November, Speed got a letter from Hill asking him to come and stand before the microphone and do an auctioneer's chant to introduce Your Lucky Strike Hit Parade. And Speed did that, and he tagged it Sold American.
Let that historic chant remind you that Lucky Strike means fine tobacco. Yes, Lucky Strike means fine tobacco. So round, so firm, so fully packed, so free and easy on the draw.
I loved going to the warehouse and hearing the tobacco auctioneer and watching the people interact. They stand there and they blend in with the bankers, with the insurance salespeople, the used car salespeople, the fertilizer chemical salespeople, the tractor supply, farm supply people, and the preachers and everybody else. And it becomes a tightly fused, tightly bonded culture. It was a sense of bonding, a sense of togetherness, a sense of brotherhood, a sense of kinship. We all lived and breathed for the same reason, and that was to grow, harvest, and market our crops.
I grew up in a rusty shack. All I owned was a hanging on my back. God knows how I loathe this place called Tobacco Road, but it's home, yeah. The only life I'd ever known. But the Lord knows I loathe Tobacco Road.
it's been pretty interesting, the progression, but it's been a fast progression, from the auction to what we're doing now is contract. The auction system was a really good way of doing it, but it was probably not the most efficient way. We'd put the tobacco on a belt and goes down the belt, and the guys buy it, and it's like what we do here with 4 lines. It's like 4 auctions going on at one time, but this is a much more economic way to handle tobacco. And I think the buyout was that was a really good a good move for the farmers. Pretty much so. If the farmers got good tobacco, it assures them a good price for tobacco. And it gives him a reason to continue to be a good farmer and do what he needs to do to feed his family.
Now, we don't have that culture. We probably got 1,300 tobacco farmers in this county who produce about 25 million pounds of tobacco, where 50 years ago there were several thousands, 40, 50,000 tobacco farmers. So now the numbers have gone, thus the culture has gone. We no longer have the tobacco culture, but we still, even today, feel ourselves as a tobacco county. There are second, third generation tobacco farmers still around who are not farming, but remember it well. And they sit around the country stores and they talk about the good old days. They come down to Frank Lee's tobacco warehouse, his contract, and they mill around and they talk about tobacco in the present. But most of the people, when they talk about it, they talk about it in the past.
There's a lot of good things in playing in the tobacco field and coming to the warehouse. When I was a kid, you could we had like Pepsi Cola once a week on Friday night or popcorn, and when you come to the tobacco market, you could always get a little something extra at the store, a piece of candy or something like that. So yeah, there's a lot of good memories.
My favorite memories were my cousins would come to see me, and we worked in tobacco and we played, and my daddy would threaten to kill us all because he couldn't get us to work and do what we were supposed to do. My favorite memories were sitting in the strip house, or actually standing in the strip house, pulling off the tobacco off of the sticks, while my grandmother and my mother and my aunt and other people would sit and grade the tobacco. They put it in different grades on a bench. And listening to them talk and listening to the local radio station, to the Farm and Home Hour that came on at 11:30 every day, and it did all of the prices and how tobacco was selling and all of the agriculture news, things like that.
A lot of people are kind of nostalgic about the old way of auctioning tobacco. Do you ever get nostalgic about it?
Yeah, oh yeah. It was a lot of fun, when you go up down the road with the buyers and had the auctioneer chanting. I'd like to do another one. In fact, I got a tape of the last one we did, and the big one, and I like to look at it, because it's a really good tape.
Bit up there in the 90 volts. I'm in the 90 down in the 90 down in the west. I'm in the 90 down in the west. I'm in the 90 down in the 90 down in the 90 volts. I'm in the 90 down in a bit up there in the 90 volts. I'm in the 90 down in the 90 down in the west. I'm in the west. I'm in the 90 down in the 90 down in the 90 volts. I'm in the 90 down in a bit up there in the 90 volts. I'm in the 90 down in the 90 down in the west. I'm in the 90 down.
In my memory, they just all started coming. I think maybe the first year, it was just, okay, well, there are a bunch of birds out there, and that's not that unusual. But then as the winter grew, the birds grew. I guess they had some signal to each other, and they came from miles around. There's nothing you can do to stop 11 million blackbirds.
we saw those birds coming in here, well, we didn't think anything of it. We thought they would leave pretty quickly, you know. Didn't realize they'd stay here for a period of time.
When people first started seeing them coming, like, oh my gosh, they're not coming back.
Every year the birds come up in Canada, fly all the way to North Carolina, and then they spend the season there. It starts to getting too warm for them. They pack up their suitcases and head back to Canada. The grackles were the majority, and the rest of them were in smaller numbers. There's nothing quite in the world to describe 6 million blackbirds. It just defies the imagination of humankind.
Letters poured into the newspaper, and we read every one in hopes of finding a cure for the problem.
Oregon, Illinois. Get everyone in town to go out in the yard and beat pans and shoot fireworks. Mullins, South Carolina. Get an owl.
It was only just less than 2 blocks from where I lived, and my brother had a house right there about where the birds were, and other people back there as well. Oh gosh, the noise was terrible. It really was.
It was very loud. There's lots of, you know, cackling, and then whirl, and just roar.
Charlotte, North Carolina. Fire Roman candles into the woods after dark.
So it was quite a visitors thing for so many people, and they enjoyed coming when it put on the national news. They came from all around, long distance, to see the birds.
At first people thought, well, this is really pretty cool. We have a tourist attraction, and this is great. And then it was just too much. It was crowded. You couldn't, go to the cruise or something, and you couldn't get in there because people from out of town were there trying to eat.
Shreveport, Louisiana. Trap the birds and clean like chicken. Simmer all day. Tastes like chicken.
Six million birds occupy an awful lot of trees. So a lot of them were roosting on the ground. They just fall off the tree. They sit on the tree and they're hungry and they got a chill and they just fall on the ground.
Oh, lots of them died. Probably the younger ones just didn't survive. You would go back there and they would be like Alfred Hitchcock and the birds and stuff. They'd be dead birds.
Kansas City, Missouri. Apparently, a solid wall of deadly atomic radiation has built up somewhere along the line. They are warning us that there is trouble somewhere nearby.
You didn't want to be outside when they were coming in. They were dropping as they were flying, and so you just didn't want to be out there. One Saturday, my best friend Lydia and I pulled on the snow boots we'd never used and set out on an expedition into bird country. We'd heard rumors that the birds had left a knee-high slop of droppings in the forest floor, and this was something worth exploring. But soon the musk filled our noses, suffocating as we stepped shin-deep into the rotting droppings.
I made about 100 major investigations of the disease epidemic, and this is one of the best ones. I mean, this was a very fascinating event. Early in the work, there was no human sickness that we detected that could be related to the birds at all. But then, late along the way, came an unknown disease which began to attack people. Fever 104, severe headache, intermittent chills, severe muscle pain, severe chest pain, pronounced weakness, and extreme bodily discomfort. We never did find out what caused the disease, but it probably was what they call a coxiella. Coxiella is a pathogenic organism. There are several different species of it. We decided that it did not come from North Carolina. It came from the birds from Canada.
The town and everyone else tried everything they could possibly try, but with no avail.
Private enterprise group had brought an airplane in, and they're going to spray them with water to give them a chill and catch pneumonia and die. We were not in favor of that, but we also didn't see how we could oppose it, so we let them go ahead and spray. If it did any good or not, I never could tell.
I think they just decided one day it was time to move on, and we were just delighted.
To watch them go in and fly around and become not just scattered birds all around, but this, what appeared to be a living, breathing being. It was beautiful to watch. They were just birds.
Flying birds, excellent birds. Watch them fly. There they go. Falling snow.
Uh-oh. Hey.
Oh my God. Okay, we're done.
We had a little theater across the street that we just packed them in. We packed that little old thing full every Friday and Saturday because we had a jackpot. And everybody would come, you know, sign their name when they went in, sit down, and then between shows, they would have a drawing.
I have a large family, and the first time that we ever went, that I remember going to that theater, was probably to see some religious film that our dad took us to.
My earliest memory is my dad took me, my sisters, and myself to the theater, and I was probably 5 or 6. And I was absolutely terrified of movies because I thought they were real. And the movie was about a shipwreck, people trying to get in lifeboats. And I think we all had to go home because I just started crying. But then my next good memory of the theater was I got over that fear, and it was a Saturday adventure. We got to go to the movie, the cowboy movies on Saturday.
I was actually one of 4, and me being the youngest. Lewis being my oldest brother, who actually started out in the old theater and moved to the new theater when it was built. And my next brother, Tom, who actually worked in the new theater, and Charles, who actually worked at Siler City.
And I happened to be the oldest of the 4. We were like stair steps. Was born a little over a year apart. There's a year and a week between me and Ron, and a year and 2 months between Ron and Jerry, and a year and 3 or 4 months between Jerry and my sister. So I think they looked at us because there was 3 of us. So if I needed to be off for something, either Ron or Jerry would fill in for me.
I remember as a small child the lollipops being a nickel a piece, but they lasted through the whole movie, and then beyond, enough to take home with you. You always had fountain drinks, which were really special, not something that you got to do very often.
Spent quite some time there from, I call it bottom to top. From changing signs, popping popcorn, helping clean up, to running the movie.
Miss Laughlin sold tickets. The Bear Girls, there was several of those. Virginia Bear sold tickets. Verl Bear sold tickets. And Patty Bear sold tickets. There was about 3 or 4. So she'd find families where there was 2 or 3 girls or 2 or 3 guys, and that way they had somebody to fall back on if somebody got sick or whatever.
I do remember at one point a group of teenage kids driving up in this old, nicely restored car with almost like a mobster type car with doors that open backwards, and a whole group of them falling out of this car right there in front of the movie theater. And getting to see that was really cool.
A negative side of the movies, especially when it came to Westerns back then, I kind of knew what was going to go on. These were the same movie sets, the same scenes. You know, they can't go out and make a total new scene for every movie.
The war was ending. Things were getting more that we could get them, you know. She decided that she wanted to build a new building for the people of Liberty. They've been in that old little thing for so long. So she did. And it went on well, and then when it got ready for us to move in, we were going to have a big opening. We had the theater people from Charlotte and all around to come, and we had the first showing that night.
A lot of kids went to the movies, and the matinee on Saturday afternoon was sort of like a babysitting service, because the mothers would drop them off. But Miss Curtis used to walk the aisles, and if anybody got a little bit rowdy, she'd get on them, so they knew that was coming on. I guess I worked there for 4 years or so, but I enjoyed the whole time I worked there. They were 2 wonderful people to work with. And when I graduated from high school, I already knew I didn't want to go to college. And so I went to work at Liberty Hosier Mill, and then Uncle Sam needed my help.
I guess the most interesting thing of popping popcorn to me was you had to roll a machine out front, but you had to plug in inside. I was plugging it in, was thunder and lightning, and we were not going to put it out front. And as I was plugging it in, we had kind of a lightning bolt, and it knocked me off of the stool that I was standing on to plug it in. I'll never forget that, because the metal off the plug ran down my arm. Had a burn place for a while.
It was just something we look forward to every Saturday. It cost 9 cents to go to the movie. So you took a dime and you had a penny left. I can see myself standing in front of the theater waiting to go up and buy my ticket with my sisters and other friends, because it's like all the kids in Liberty seem to go to the movies on Saturday.
They did have on weekends 7 and 9 o'clock shows. So even if I worked my little part-time job there in town, I could still get off and get to the theater for one of those shows. I could even do Sunday night church things and still get to the theater by 7 o'clock. So it was a focal point of my life during those teenage years, and dating and just group activities with teenagers. I can't even remember cost. I do remember the tiny little ticket booth right on the corner of the building, right on the corner of the street. But it didn't seem excessive when you had a little part-time job in a grocery store. The cost to get in a movie didn't seem excessive.
And we loved the cowboy movies, Hopalong Cassidy, The Lone Ranger. And there was one cowboy star named Lash LaRue, and he actually came to the theater and was on the stage. Now, my cousin absolutely loved Lash LaRue. When he actually came live and was on the stage there in the theater, I did not go because he was not one of my favorites. But I can remember her just going crazy that Lash LaRue was coming to Liberty. Our family went to and belonged to the Methodist Church. When they tore down our old sanctuary to build a new one, our church used the theater for Sunday services. Now going back to that 1 penny left over when you bought your ticket, on Sunday mornings, we would have Sunday school at the educational building at the church, which was right close to the theater. And then we would walk over to the theater for church. We'd get there early, and then I remember just going because the theater was dark during the movies and you couldn't see, but they had the lights up when we came in for church, going over the floor looking for pennies. And I'm not kidding you, one Sunday morning I found 4 or 5 pennies. And I thought I had hit the jackpot.
And we were one of the first, in fact, I guess we were the first, to have a cry room. And it had, of course, the big window there for you to see the screen. You know, you could hear if you was nursing your baby. And instead of asking people to take their children out when they were loud, you just said, take them to the cry room. In 1929, Daddy built uptown the little theater. He ran it on Friday and Saturday, and then things got really pretty bad, and he closed. And then in 1935, I remember that date, my daddy died, and we had 2 families. He was married the first time, and his wife died 31 years old with childbirth. Then he married my mother and had me and my brother. And then when Daddy died in 35, my mother says, I've either got to get in there and save what we've got or give it up. And she had helped him when he needed help, but never worked for him. She just walked right out of the kitchen and out and did all these things, and she just did a beautiful job. She died in October. I moved her out to my house in the country in September, and she died in October, and she would have been 100 if she had lived till December. Back during the war, they always had all kinds of news reels and what the boys were and where they were fighting and all that stuff. My neighbor was at the show one night, and all of a sudden she came flying back to the ticket office. This was in the old theater during World War II. And she said, I saw my brother. They had not heard from him in a long time. And they were unloading a truck of prisoners of war, and he was one of them. Well, Margaret Martin was his sister, and she was just beside herself. And my mother told her, says, Margaret, after the show is over tonight, we will run that over and let you see it. And it showed it real good. He was coming off the back of the truck, and he had some kind of box in his hand, and they took the box from him and pushed him on away. But they were taking him to a Japanese prison camp. He was a prisoner of war. Margaret went to Greensboro on Elam Avenue, got her mother and her brother, and brought them, and they ran that film over and over and over. He got home. He did get home. See, in a little town, you get things done like that because people help people. You can't do that in a big place. Now, what are you going to do with all this? I'm getting good.